Thank you very much for the introduction. I know we're running a little bit late, but hopefully you'll find it worthwhile. Now, before we get started on a topic such as transformation, I usually like to start by asking people around the room, how many people have lived through at least one HR transformation? Can I just see a show of hands? How many people have lived through more than two HR transformations? Still some hands. How many people have led HR transformations? There we go. So everything we're going to be talking about is not going to be new. You're not going to walk away from this and say, wow, I never thought of that. Because transformation is something that people need to evolve and work towards all the time. Now, whether it's in HR, whether it's a transformation in a very different industry, you're still going to be looking at aspects of change. And change is something that absolutely must happen to keep you dynamic and on the ball to the challenges that loom in whichever function, whichever industry you're talking about. So what we'll do today is to start by talking about why transform. When we talk about the HR context, why do we need to transform? And importantly, why today? The second is, okay, it's back. What are the elements of a successful HR transformation? So we'll unpack it and try to understand what are the key factors that need to change from an HR standpoint as we're standing here in 2022, looking ahead into 2023. And then we'll spend the bulk of the discussion on how do you make HR transformation stick. So let's get started with why transform and why today. Again, not a big surprise, but the world has been changing quite a lot in the last few years. And what people expect, what people want to get out of work is fundamentally different. Now, I wanted to put a few facts out there, which I found quite interesting. For example, more than 50% of people on this survey, in fact, responded to saying that they're open to looking for another position over the next year. So this idea of loyalty, of hire all the way until retire is long gone. People are willing to switch at the drop of a hat when they understand that there's something in it for them. The second is social impact. Gone are the days when you choose a particular organization just because of the vocation it provides. You're going to ask a lot of questions in terms of what the organization does for you. Does that align with your purpose? Does that align with your values? Is that contributing to any negative repercussions on the environment, on the society? And these are questions that people take up as they think about simply taking up a job. I also wanted to say that what people expect out of a job has been changing a lot over time. Now, this is a survey that was conducted, and we do this fairly regularly, and you can see that moving over from 2014 all the way until 2020, some things have not really changed. So things like you expect to have colleagues that you can really blend with, you have a superior that you respect and can work with, these are important. But when you look at things like compensation, for me, when I first saw this survey, it was a surprise for me. Because I thought compensation was something that's going to be very, very important in motivating people to come to work. But as you can see, compensation, even in 2020, is number 4. And 2020 is the bulk of when you had COVID strike. So a lot of people lost their jobs. And so it's not a big surprise that they needed compensation in order to keep them in the job. Now, I haven't showed the last column, which is Malaysia. And I just wanted to get a view from you. What do you think is the most important for Malaysia in 2020? Just looking at those buckets that are there. Do you think it mirrors the world? Is it different? Anyone? What's the number one aspect? What's that? So interesting. If I show you Malaysia, number 1 was in fact financial compensation, which is, again, a little bit surprising. And this is not in line with a lot of the surveys we've done across the world. So it's a little bit different, but you will notice similarities. When you look at the top 5 to 6 of those things, they're not different. So ultimately, what motivates individuals, irrespective of where they work, where they're looking for jobs, is not that different. You look for the same things, sure, some things might matter a little bit more, but the point is these preferences are evolving over time, and we need to really understand our customer, which is the person, before we design any sort of transformation that's going to make any impact on the people. And in any organization, in the balance sheet, we know that the people is so important. So if you don't pay attention to what your customers are looking for, it doesn't matter ultimately what you're working towards. Even if you're a public sector company, if you're a public sector corporation, a ministry that's looking to address the people in the country, or whether you're a for-profit firm that's looking to develop or expand products into a new space. it's important to understand those customers. And the balance sheet that implies the people in the organization is going to be fundamentally important. One other thing I wanted to just show out here is something I also found quite surprising. You would think when you get into a job, the expectation is you will progress and eventually move into managerial positions. That's gone. Those days aren't there. So we as BCG, a consulting firm, hire a lot of people who are fresh out of university. And if you ask them where they want to be in a period of 3 years, most of the people throw you a blank face. They have no idea. They want to try it for a period of time, get some experience, understand what really ticks them, and then they want to move and try something else. So when we did the survey and we asked how many people in fact want to move over into a managerial position, it was less than 20% who are looking forward to that. What I also found surprising is if you then ask these people who are motivated to move up the ladder into managerial positions on who should help you get there, the response was, the onus of responsibility is on you. It's not going to be someone looking out for you who's going to push you towards career progression. It's something you need to drive towards. It's internal. You have to go and get the support that you want in order to make sure that you can progress up the ladder exactly as you expect. Now, these might not come as surprises to you, but when we talk to a lot of our clients, these are surprising facts. And if the organization is not ready to deal with them, then of course it becomes a lot more challenging. We talked a little bit about social impact. Now, sustainability in its broadest sense is now table stakes. Gone are the days when you can attract someone just by saying that we are a sustainable company. A lot of people know that it could just be something that gets put out as a list of words to explain that you're working towards sustainability, or you can move in a green industry. But still, there's a lot of value that's placed across what you stand for in that era of sustainability. And when we think about how the talent pool is changing and the type of jobs, the job families that we're working with, it's evolving. We see changes also in the aspect of sustainability. So it's not a matter of, I am in a profession of oil and gas, and I want to move into something that's a bit more future-proof, let's say in green technology. Even green technology is fast evolving. So very quickly, when you look at the areas that are growing versus you look at what's in fact the number of people who are hired in them, you see a lot of new professions that are emerging, even in this space of sustainability and green. So again, a lot of transformation has to happen to make sure that you're always current on the ball and you get access to the best talent, because they're the ones who are going to be fueling your organization. Now, many of you in this room are HR professionals, so this is something that's a lot closer to home. So let's take a step back, moving away from, let's say, the customer aspect of it, and thinking about what we, as practitioners, can in fact offer to the rest of the organization. Now, when you look at the left-hand side, the typical Dave Ulrich model that is typically used in HR across the world, you have your HR business partners, you have your centers of excellence, you have your shared service centers, and they work harmoniously to ensure that you're able to deliver on a lot of the sub-functions that you need to. So you've got the strategic, the analytical, you've got the transactional, the operational, and you have some aspects that come in from automated processes. If you have RPA, for example, running in certain parts, you might outsource some of your business. That's typically how it looks. But increasingly, with the advent of digital, with the advent of AI, and just how much of AI can in fact be used in aspects of HR, I'm sure many of you ask yourselves the questions, how much value are we really adding back to the organization? Are we in some ways going to become obsolete? Is there aspects that can be taken over by an algorithm that can do much better than us as HR practitioners? So if you look to the right-hand side, what you'll observe is that the size of those buckets is evolving, and it's evolving very quickly. When you look at best-in-class companies, and you look at what's in fact provided by shared service centers and the self-service platforms, so you see that that's a much, much larger aspect than what's done in a lot of the organizations today. But that doesn't make HR obsolete. What it does is it allows you to focus on things that are really value-adding to the organization. The strategic aspects of it, where you really need to drive a lot of conversations to understand what moves the needle and then working towards delivering that. So HR is not going to become obsolete. However, with the advent of digital, the aspects of HR which can be made better and maybe cheaper and more efficient in some ways will happen. But this is just a part and parcel of any transformation, and we know this. So it's important for us as practitioners to ensure that we stay relevant all the time. So I've talked a lot about the why. I'm just going to summarize before we move into the next chapter. There's a lot of aspects from our customers, which are the people, on what they expect out of an organization. Sustainability is going to be very, very important. We know that digitization and AI is going to continue disrupting what we can and will do. And also importantly, COVID has taught us in the last few years that it's possible to accelerate a lot of these very, very quickly. If I were to stand in this room in 2019 and ask you if remote working was going to be something that your organizations can follow at scale, I am certain there would be less than one hand. So there would be exactly zero. But if I ask you that same question today, I'm pretty sure almost everyone in this room is just going to say, absolutely. How did we not think about this? So the fundamental premise of how quickly an organization can evolve when it comes to it is just mind-boggling. Now, what this means is, if you want to stay ahead and you want to make sure that you're anticipating the changes, then you need to transform one step ahead. It's not about being surprised by COVID, it's about being anticipative of what's going to happen. And how can you change in order to make sure that you're going to be able to stay relevant and deliver the best results? Now, the last thing I put in here, I didn't have a slide on it, but if you look at the workforce, even in Malaysia, we see a lot of evolution in the terms of who is in the workforce. A lot more women are coming into the workforce. A lot more mothers are looking to stay in the workforce. They look for different things as well. So again, your customer is going to be the people in the organization. If the clientele changes, if their expectations change, then you will have to make sure that the value proposition you can offer them also needs to change. If you're going to attract them to your organization, you had better be attractive from a value proposition. Otherwise, they're going to go to the organization right next to you, and you're going to lose out on a very strong talent pool. So any questions at this stage on the why? I think it's fairly obvious. I see a lot of nodding. So we all understand that, yes, transformation is necessary. And given that you've all lived through it so many times, how do we get the next one to be right? And how do we stay in a mode of constant transformation if we need to, without running into transformation fatigue? We're now going to unpack a little bit about what transformation really means in HR. And before we get there, I wanted to show you a little bit about how people might start looking at your companies and organizations. Now, when we think about energy, and we asked this question, say, 5, 10 years ago, energy was primarily oil and gas. There was some renewables, people cared about it. There was some rhetoric on what they're going to be doing in making a change in the world, moving over to renewable sources. But it wasn't something that was adopted in scale. Now, if you take this and turn this question on its head and say, who are the organizations similar to energy that are really a step ahead investing in people, then we can in fact look at this by looking at the investments that are on personnel-related costs and what are the investments that are happening on the capital side. And these are companies you're all familiar with in Malaysia. Some of the ones that are on the right-hand side look particularly good because they're obviously investing in people, but we've run this across the globe. And when you look at some of the other countries, the scores you can get on the personal cost over capital cost gets closer to 10. So there are things to celebrate, of course. Some companies are already evolving, they're moving towards that, but there's much more that can be done. If you look at this even within a sector, so let's say the banking sector, and we've got 3 there, we've got Maybank, we've got CIMB, and RHB, you can still see small deviances across them. So this is not something that's driven by the industry, it's something that a firm decides where it's going to put its investments. Now, when we think about HR departments, given that they are constantly transforming and moving in this era of change, are we really equipped to deal with that change? So we try to understand what are some of the aspects that gives us some understanding that maybe the glass is in fact half empty. If you think about how many of these HR organizations in fact have the right strategy to move ahead, a lot of people feel that they're inadequate. If you think they have the data that's needed, the quality of data that's needed, just a single source of truth that allows you to build on a lot of additional things to address this different clientele that you have, and an evolving clientele, Most organizations tell us we're not quite there yet. It's something we really need to work on. And finally, when we take it from the sustainability and ESG standpoint, it's even more alarming. There's readiness from an HR standpoint to take on and embrace this. And as I said, I saw a lot of nods across the room. But there needs to be readiness as well with that to be able to, in fact, undertake that transformation. And that's where some of these organizations are still behind. When we try to understand what aspects of HR, in fact, are probably the furthest behind and are most urgent to go through change, there were a number of things that came up, and I apologize that the screen's not very large, so I'm just going to call out a few of these things. A few aspects that came up were behaviors, leadership behaviors, reskilling, the need to cross-skill, the need to upskill. This was urgent. Strategic workforce planning, anticipating in advance which are the areas that you're going to be needing talent of a very specific type, and then going ahead and filling those in advance of when it's actively needed. This strategic workforce planning is something that's relatively urgent across organizations. Change management, analytics and digital. These are all aspects that are quite high in terms of the most urgent thing that requires change. When we think about the medium things that need to change, the low things that need to change, there's obviously a much longer list. But the fact of the matter is, if you take on something that looks to change everything that you have, it's very, very difficult. Every organization will need to prioritize in some aspects in terms of how you move ahead. And it's probably best done if you understand what's going to drive the highest impact. Where do we have the biggest gap? What's really going to give us outsized results for any investments that we're going to be putting in? You had a question? I will have to defer that to the back. I'm not exactly sure if we can do that. Sure.
No.
Anyway, the font in the other ones will be larger. I think
this.
this is one of the other ones. So let's maybe move ahead and then we'll come back to this. I'm happy to talk about it later as well. So with that said, in terms of where some of the gaps are, knowing that we have to prioritize, we can't really do everything together. We as BCG kind of looked at HR across the world in different aspects and looked about what are some of the big things that are going to give you outsized returns. And what we have found is there are three things sitting in 2022 that's going to be able to do that as HR in an organization. The first of this is not a big surprise. It's the operating model. Now, there's so many aspects to an operating model. There's the processes, there's the governance, there's the people, the team that you have, there's the IT, the skills that you need. All of that is there, and we'll see what we mean by operating model. If you had to prioritize and move forward and make some changes to your organization, where would that be to get the most outsized returns? But the key point is operating model has to change to some degree. Second thing, analytics. With data that's disrupting and digital that's disrupting and making so much possible, why would we take a step back and let data dictate where our organization's going to go? We need to be ahead of the game. We need to utilize this data. We have so much data as HR. How can we target that into the right areas to make sure that we're in fact utilizing the most of the information we have, we're able to filter out any of the noise that's not helpful, and then deliver results which are going to be moving our organization forward. So data and analytics is a big thing that we need to work towards. The third thing is employee journeys. Now, many of you who might have worked in a bank or come from a setting of a financial institution, I think they were relatively advanced when it comes to changing the way of working. Customer journeys are some things that happen a lot in banks. You move away from this idea of, I am purely focused functionally, to an idea of, I am going to be looking at a customer and the different sectors or the different touch points that a customer has with our organization. And I will then think about what are all the pain points along that and then solution them. Because if you take that angle, you're taking the angle of a customer and addressing every single hiccup that that customer is going to have with your organization. And banks have moved towards this and shifted towards this because they realize very quickly that there are different types of customers and what they're looking for and their moments of truth are going to fundamentally differ. So if you offer them something like generalized finance, that's not going to be helpful because what people need from finance by being a 30-year-old who's just changed 2 jobs and is now in a mid-management position versus someone who's 55-year-olds and thinking about his retirement and the kids that are there is very, very different. So the expectations from finance products that need to be provided, the number of times they're going to come and walk into a branch, the relationship managers they need to work with are going to look very, very different. So if you look at them separately and you pick up each of these customer journeys, you're then able to adapt them to the customer. Now, as I said earlier, with HR, we're no different because our clients are the people in the organization. So if you take this mindset shift of moving away from this idea of I'm going to be in talent management, I work only for recruiting, I work only for compensation, let's say, to this idea of I'm going to look at something that matters from an employee standpoint across that employee journey. So I'm going to be looking at rewards. I will look at how we reward our employees. That's taking this mindset shift from I am an expert in this function to this idea of I'm going to pick up a particular client type that I'm going to be able to influence, and I'm going to correct all the frictions that are happening there to deliver results from an HR standpoint. So this is the third priority that we would put in terms of what you need to pursue in 2023 and beyond. So just as a matter of recap, operating model, we're going to look under the hood and see what needs to change. Can't change everything. So if you had to pick a few things that we're going to change, what would they be? Second, we're going to look at data and analytics and make sure we double down on this, take the most advantage we can from them, and see what they can do in the different parts of our function. And the third aspect is to make this mindset shift of I am embedded into this function to this idea of I'm going to own this specific employee journey and really think about how I can iron out the frictions and make it so much better. So let's take the first of those and think about the organization. Now, in the operating model of HR, there are many, many different aspects of what you would consider your primary role. And most of the organizations in Malaysia, I would say, fall between number 1 and number 2. So your business service professionals, where you have centers of excellence, you have your shared service centers, you have your HRBPs, and again, you are business service partners. You are serving the organization to their business needs from the people aspect. Now, organizations that have moved a little bit further ahead have discovered very quickly that there are some frictions in that Dave Ulrich model, which number 1 denotes, in the sense that the real expertise that you have isn't being necessarily challenged and channeled into the right usage across the organization. So you have a center of excellence, which is very much driven by people who understand the theory, but don't really understand what the business needs. And so there's a little bit of a mismatch there in terms of the expertise. You have a fairly large group of HRBPs who are serving the business and so are a little bit more detached from the expertise that needs to be provided. And that channel that works in through the COEs as well as the shared service centers gets a little bit disrupted. So organizations have moved into number 2, which is building up what we call global functional teams, where your HRBP is a much, much smaller layer, and they're the true advisors to the business. They ask the questions of what the business needs, and then they hand it over to the global functional teams who work very closely with them and drive it with true expertise. It's not a big change, but it's a small change. And the way that the organization rewards these employees and looks at the HR organization and who they report to, what they're celebrated for, fundamentally changes. And this allows you to deliver with a lot more expertise in there. But that's just moving from number 1 to 2. If you're really talking about a step change, that's not going to be enough. What we've seen some HR organizations in Malaysia moving towards is number 3, which is agile HR. Now, let me just have a show of hands. How many of you work in an agile setting in your organizations, or at least have tried it in some aspects? Not really. So let me explain a little bit about what agile means. Agile is many different things. The first is you no longer work in this idea of I am embedded to a function and hence I deliver for that function. You work in cross-functional teams. So if you take this mindset of I am going to solve a problem, the way Agile typically looks at is you pick up the problems that need solving and you find the right teams for you to do that. Now, what typically happens when you're looking to solve problems is you have this person in compensation who then has to call up someone in OD and say, hey, this is what I'm going to need in my organization. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to figure out this box and how much it needs to cost. And then you have a conversation with finance and say, hey, is the business case in fact worked out? Is that something that we're allowed to hire for? And there's a lot of phone calls that needs to happen. But it's driven by an HR VP, a poor guy or a lady, who needs to then push this through and have a lot of conversations. And if you think about what motivates finance, it's not prioritizing you. If you think about OD, it's not prioritizing you because that's not what OD stands for. But if you work in a cross-functional team where your objective is to figure out the new employees that you have to hire from a group that you've never hired from before, then you start solving the problem together. And you're motivated and rewarded for solving that problem. So the first aspect of Agile is you move away from this idea of I'm a functional expert and I'm going to stay a functional expert, work with all the others as I need to this idea of I am a problem solver and I'm going to belong in a group of cross-functional individuals who are going to have something to contribute towards it, and we're going to work together to solve that problem. And that's the job we have. That's our day job. It's not a project, it's my day job. I'm going to be appointed as a project member to that team, and that's my day job, to solve that problem. So that's the first aspect of Agile. The second aspect of Agile is you no longer work in this idea of, I'm going to push towards and deliver the best results in the next 3 months, because that's the deadline I have in order to deliver results. The aspect of Agile is you guys are going to stand in the corner of a room, take a whiteboard, figure out what are the 15 things that need doing between now and tomorrow. And then you're going to ascribe responsibilities to your Agile squad and say, hey, this is going to be picked up by person A, this is going to be picked up by person B, this is going to be picked up by person C. It's an efficient 10-minute meeting because everyone has different functions, they all have different jobs to do, but you're all motivated and driving towards the same results. At the end of the day, you look at the backlog on that whiteboard and see what's moved ahead, what needs some problem solving. So gone are the days where you have to set up meetings with all these different functions and then try and get towards results because you have all of them together. And you're using your meeting time to only focus on areas that needs joint thinking. That's all. It's just joint thinking. And I had a slide which I didn't put on this. The typical difference between Agile and the typical waterfall way of working, which is the more familiar one, is a Mona Lisa. And the way that's described, and I'm really sorry that I didn't have it here, but I'll try to describe it the best I can. In a typical waterfall method, if you're going to be drawing the best Mona Lisa in the world, the way it starts is you have the bottom part of it. So you can see a little bit of that, this part of the photo. And then you get to this part, and it looks okay. But finally, when you get to the head, you realize it's completely distorted. It's like this really unflattering representation of a person, but that only happens in the last few days. And by that time, your time is gone. There's no way that you can, in fact, deliver the best Mona Lisa. If you're going to do it in an Agile setting, what happens on the first day is you have the outline of the face. That's all. Just an outline in pencil, absolutely nothing else. Over time, what you develop is the next layer. So you can sort of see, okay, this is kind of going to be where the face is. This is sort of going to be where the neck is. And then you put like a pencil sketch together. Then you color it a little bit. And every step of the way, you discover what's not going right. If I need to brighten up certain colors, I do that. If I need to dim out specific areas, I do that. If I think the sketch is not looking like the nose, and I need to get that edited, I have time to get that done. So by the time you get to the end, and that very first piece of getting that pencil sketch of the outline, everyone is fully aligned in terms of what's happening. There isn't going to be a big surprise on what gets delivered. This is the power of Agile. So it's two things. One, I'm going to be moving away from a functional orientation to cross-functional teams who are going to be working towards a common problem. That's one. Second, the way of working is going to move away from doing typical things we do. We're going to prioritize team time in order to really problem solve what we need to do as a team, minimize meetings as much as possible, but at the same time, we all know what happens on a daily basis towards our goal, which is to solve that problem. That's Agile, okay? So, Agile HR advancement is when organizations look to shift from the way that they're organized into a bit of Agile setting. And it could happen in both ways. It could be from an organizational setting, where you no longer sit in specific boxes. You're in fact aligned to different teams. Or it could be in a setting where you take up just the Agile way of working. You could still be organized into different functions. You could still have meetings with them separately, but at least you follow an agile methodology in terms of how you're going to be delivering your results. The fourth way, which is a bit more sophisticated, and as I mentioned, some sectors like banking, for example, has moved ahead. Not so much on the HR front, but in other aspects of the client-facing organizations, they have moved ahead, is this employee journey facilitation. This is where HR moves away from being oriented towards delivering just any results into orientating towards journeys, understanding your specific customers, which are our people, figuring out what would be the way that you cut them across different journeys, and then you follow all the agile principles we talked about. So I'm gonna be looking at reward, so I'm gonna pick up all the different people that I need across my functions, and that's all they're gonna be looking at, just reward. And we're gonna be rewarding them for delivering rewards, right? So that's this employee journey, and all HR does is facilitate that employee journey. We figure out what are the frictions along that, we figure out how you solve some of those frictions, and you make that employee journey delightful. And this is an important word. I mean, I'm not just throwing out the word delightful. Typically, when you think about people who do Agile, their end of the day outcome is to get delighted customers. So this is not just about ironing out problems you have. It's about even a process that works fairly smoothly, how can you make it delightful? That's what you move towards. So every day you have a change in mind, how can I make this better? And when you're divided and pushed towards this change, it makes so much of a difference in terms of how much power you're able to deliver to the organization. And then you have 5 and 6, which is looking probably a few years ahead. I haven't seen many organizations that are using 5 and 6 in an HR context, but it's probably going to be coming, so might as well talk about it a little bit. 5 is very much where you have an organization that's very self-driven. You have a lot of tools out there that they can use. Applying for leave is super easy, they do it themselves. If they need to hire someone, super easy, they can do it by picking what they need exactly, and everything sort of gets automated and done in the back end. And the next part of that is in fact moving into AI and EI services. We'll see some of these, and some organizations do that better than others, where you're utilizing not just artificial intelligence, but you're using emotional intelligence as a machine tool in order to understand what happens. And the perfect example of this is when you're doing recruiting. I was looking at Google, and this was, I think about 3 to 5 years ago, in the way that they've piloted some technology to look at people applying to Google. Just by looking at your facial movements and how you're interacting during the interview, they're making decisions as, do you have the potential to be the future CEO? Very simple. I mean, for someone coming in fresh into an organization to being CEO, there's a huge gap. But by looking at how people behave, how people respond, you have a lot of data. And you're utilizing that to understand something which is important to you. Does this guy have leadership potential that I can utilize and nurture in order to push this person ahead? And if this person's never going to be a leader, do I even want to hire this person? Maybe I don't. So it's not what's being said. It's also about how that's being said. So you can utilize EI together with AI to deliver very sophisticated results. Now, that's not doomsday. We have to figure out where this is useful, where it's not useful. But the point of it is, if you think about what HR's role is, are you going to be relegated to a role where all you do is develop sophisticated technology that allows you to do that? Are you going to figure out that, no, I can add a lot of value, I'm going to figure out the problems that need solving, and I'm then going to double down on it in an agile fashion to deliver them? Or am I going to stay what I'm doing today? I have the functions, I'm going to continue what I'm doing, and that's going to allow me to respond to all these changes and disruptions we're seeing and continue to stay ahead. I'll spend less time on this. It's the organizational aspect of this strategic role I talked about. And you can see that these can be done in many, many different ways. And along each of those 5 I talked about, you have the equivalent of different teams. Now, I'm going to look at one of these specifically, which is an agile HR team structure. Just given that the team is a little bit less familiar with the way agile works, the way this is set up is on the right-hand side, you have true experts. So these are true experts in, let's say, organization and talent, performance and rewards. So you have those green individuals who bring that very specific expertise, and they belong to what we call a tribe. So the tribe has all that experience that they need and all the expertise it needs within that function. But what's interesting is they don't sit in that function. Where they sit is under specific employee journeys. So you're going to be orientating the HR organization along these employee journeys And you will pick people as you need and place them within that. So you can see the same green individuals are in fact picked from these expert teams and placed within that. On the left-hand side in blue, you see the different accounts. Think of these accounts as specific business lines. You're going to be looking at upstream, someone who focuses on downstream, and think of them as what you would like to think of as the HR business partners. But what's interesting is, again, they're mostly green individuals. So you've picked them from functional experts, and their positioning during that specific time is to deliver delight to that specific clientele. They're not solving a problem in terms of delivering that employee journey, but they're working closely with upstream to understand everything that upstream needs, and their job is to delight upstream. And the people that are going to make that up come from the different tribes, which could be experts in OD, experts in talent, experts in reward. They could be generalist HRs, someone from finance, someone from any other function that you need in order to deliver that. What you also have is what we call impact teams. Now, impact teams are people who are making big changes into something. If you're trying to get people analytics to work, you're not going to be solving this as just HR. You're going to need to work with tech people. You're going to need to work with designers, UI, UX people, which are not expertise that typically resides in HR. Not to say it doesn't, but it typically doesn't. So that's where you have people who are a different color, because you would need to pull them from different organizations and different parts of the company. And then you put them together with the right people who can then drive this together. So impact teams are those who drive big change in the organization. Employee journeys are those who are going to focus on making any aspect of the people journey delightful, and then to make sure that each of your BUs are getting exactly what they need to be ahead, you're going to set up these BU-specific teams in the accounts. But what you can see is any of those green individuals, if you talk about reporting lines, it really depends on what their function is at that point in time. If it's sitting in a particular employee journey, then all the rewards and compensation, everything that gets applied to that person is for delivering that result. It's not because the person is an expert in rewards. No one cares, right? However, you can see that because the person is double heading, there are going to be aspects where the person who in fact came from rewards needs to understand rewards in a lot more detail. Attend conferences, make sure that they go and talk to the right experts in different companies, have a network of individuals they can learn from, they have continuous development, and that's ensured because they belong to that specific tribe at the end. So it's not that they lose the functional aspect of it, it's just that that doesn't drive what HR does. So even in an organization like HR, which seems to be relatively straightforward, you can in fact move into this setting, and you can do this fairly quickly. We've done this with large organizations where an entire change throughout the entire HR needs less than a period of 4 to 6 months. Of course, you're not going to start everything together. We're going to move in an agile way to get this done, but this is something that has delivered great results across different organizations. So picking out what matters for you, this is something that's in fact possible. The next aspect is talent. So if you think back to the operating model, so many things are important. Processes are important, tools are important. We talked a little bit about organization. We talked a little bit about governance, what's going to be, how we reward these people, how we're going to celebrate them. But there's this aspect of how do you find the right talent? And we talked about how talent is looking for very, very different things. It's not the same things that your organization has offered over time. So how can you keep them relevant? How can you find them? Are you even reaching out to the right pools? When you put out a job ad, should it be a job ad or should it be a task ad? And this is this idea of figuring out the talent of the future. Now, I talked a little bit about strategic workforce planning. If you understand what your organization stands for and ultimately what your company or your business needs to deliver, then you know what's going to be driving that. The demand side is something you can get by talking to the different business lines, understand their expectations, understand your firm's strategy, and figure out what needs to happen. HR should be ahead of this, taking that information, understanding the pool of people that you have in the organization and how you need to upskill them, how you need to cross-skill them. You have some levers in order to make sure that you can address that demand to some degree. But there are going to be gaps, because a lot of the tools that you're going to be looking for, a lot of the skills you're going to be looking for, don't reside within the organization. Remember the slide I put with sustainability and green and how this is changing so much over time? A lot of demand now is for perception engineers. And if you look at perception engineers in Malaysia, very, very few. So if you're really going to be doing something that's moving ahead on the AI space, how are you going to find your perception engineers? You have to look somewhere else. So this whole idea of strategic planning, understanding the demand, breaking it down into what are the skills you need, understanding what can be delivered internally through your organization by moving people from here to there, providing them some level of upskilling. You then have a gap in terms of saying, this is what I need to recruit. You then have to ask, okay, how do I go and find that? Where do I fish? Is it the same ponds I've been to? Do I have to change something? You know, I've seen organizations that have moved away from placing ads about jobs and saying, I am looking for an expert in IT systems, to saying, I need this problem solved in IT. And you get quotations from people who say, yeah, I can get that done for you, 6 months. This is what my pay is going to be, lump sum. And you don't care about these people being full-time in your organization, looking towards delivering something that you need, but you can get that done to solve that specific task. And these can be people who are part of the gig economy, because that's where the expertise could reside, who knows? You might have Grab drivers who are able to do something much, much better than others. You have people who are, let's say, still in high school, who just have this passion for programming, and they can do something so much better than people who are established. How do you get them into the organization? How do you run like a hackathon to figure out who can solve a very difficult problem? And this is not something that's done by cutting-edge companies only. You know, even the likes of McAfee, even the likes of Norton, the antivirus softwares, they run hackathons all the time because their experts in the organization internally are not able to figure out how to crack specific things. But some kid who's 16 years old has figured it out, because that's what energizes the kid. So if you're able to get the kid into the organization, you're never going to be able to fill a box with him. Doesn't have a degree, doesn't have a qualification, there's no way you can provide benefits to that person, but it's a task that needs doing. And if that gets the job done, why not? So this idea is moving away from this idea of traditionally, I need to fill a box, to this idea of I need to understand what the organization really needs from a skills perspective, and breaking down skills to whatever small unit you can, and then thinking about how can I source those skills from within the organization. And if I can't get them within my organization by upskilling them, by retraining them, whatever it is, how can I find the missing skills? How can I do this, anticipate it, move ahead, and get them? And do I need to change my model in terms of how I get these people in? So taking a step back, operating model, we've talked about 2 things, maybe 3. The first is figuring out what's going to be the strategic role of HR that you're going to choose for your organization. Related to that, we talked about the organization, and there could be some aspects of how you organize, typically. And then there's this third aspect of how do I make sure that I'm going to be able to deliver the skills that the organization needs on time, ahead of time. We're not going to spend too much time on employee journeys because we talked a little bit about it from the agile standpoint. But you know, if you take this idea of employee journey and just play it out, you have a person that comes in, you have this workforce planning, so you know exactly what kind of an individual you need. And you start fishing in those ponds only with that very specific requirement. What you then have is a segment of one hiring strategy. Because the way you hire that 16-year-old programmer is going to need to look very, very different to how you hire experienced individuals with 10 years of work experience. So this needs to be a segment of one hiring. You need to figure out how you're going to attract and entice that one person. Then it's about interviews. You don't need to have those interviews in person. Utilize AI, utilize EI to be able to figure out whether this person really had what it needs. It's happening, it's reality now. And then you have onboarding. This can be automated, this can be customized to that very specific individual. You don't have to make this which is standardized across all. The more customized you make it, the more welcome the person will feel, and the more the person can want to contribute to the organization. You have support systems. If anything is needed, it's not that they need to call people up. You can have chatbots that address anything they have. People are sometimes reluctant to ask questions because they seem too stupid, too simple, you're going to encroach on people's toes, it's disturbing, whatever it is. You can do away with that. It's okay. To a chatbot, you can ask anything. And if you don't get those responses, you can then push it to where it needs to go. Then you have this idea of instantaneous feedback. And I can't stress this enough. When it comes to feedback, there's so much research that shows that the most powerful feedback is instantaneous. If you tell someone about something they did 3 months ago, they're like, oh, really? Okay, how did I really react? I can't remember. But if you tell them immediately after the event, so if you were to face me outside and tell me, these are the 3 things you did in your presentation that didn't go so well, that would really ring home. And you can do this instantaneously because the technology is there. Nothing is stopping you from doing this. It doesn't have to be something that gets reflected in evaluations, in something that gets reflected in how you eventually remunerate someone, but it's something that makes the person better. And feedback doesn't have to be negative. There's good feedback too. So if you tell an employee, that was great. What you did right there, it worked. Keep doing it. It motivates people, keeps them going. So instantaneous feedback is something you can do. Then is this e-learning platform. Don't leave it to just learning and development that happens twice a year by going into a specific, very specific curriculum that a person needs to follow. No, give it e-learning, provide some guidance as to what makes most sense for that individual, but let that individual choose. Provide options, make it easy. They can do it on their own time. You don't have to burn your company time to be able to do it. Automatic HR controlling dashboard. If you focus on the most strategic things only, and you have all this digital around you, you no longer have to look at every single aspect. You just need to interact with a few specific individuals. You need to interact with very specific machinery and data, and that tells you all you have to do in order to drive the organization forward. And benefits platform. This is something that many companies have now moved towards. So Under Armour, for example, has moved towards this, where you don't spend the same benefits on individuals, you offer them a menu, saying you can pick any of this, and ultimately, a lot of organizations, in fact, save a lot of money. Because when you offer benefits to an employee, you're in some ways generalizing. So you might not want health, but maybe you do. You might not want a gym membership, but maybe you do. So if you customize and provide people exactly what they need, then it gets prioritized and it doesn't cost so much. Finally, this idea of proactive attrition risk. This is used by organizations like IBM. They're monitoring, and again, when I'm saying monitoring, it's not a big brother kind of monitoring. It's not really looking over your emails and figuring out who you're writing to, but it's things like aggregated data that's anonymized, but trying to figure out specifically where are you spending your time on? What are you looking at? What are you doing? Can you make a prediction on someone who's in attrition risk? Because we know, we've seen before, that a lot of the people we have in the organizations would leave the organization at the drop of a hat. Within the next year, they would actively go and search for a job. So how do you figure out who are the highest risk? If they're the strongest talent you need in the organization that are absolutely critical, how do you prevent that from happening? If you see someone's a bit of an attrition risk, you can obviously do a lot of things. You can have a superior come and talk to them. You can have the CEO have a session with that guy and say, hey, you're very valued to this organization. What's not working for you? Is your learning not really delivering results? Is it your manager that you're having trouble working with? Is the squad not working for you? Whatever it is, you can do something about it. And if you look at attrition in a very proactive way, you can make sure that the scarcest resource you have, talent, is kept within the organization. And you can do all of these through this employee journey idea, because you're trying to understand what keeps a person from start to end. So this orientation and change in mindset, very, very important. Now, in the interest of time, I won't go very much into the third aspect, which is on people and analytics, but these are probably words you've seen before. And if you don't actively use them in your organization, you probably have at least heard of them. There are lots of different algorithms and types of technology and computing that's now out there that allows you to do a lot of different things. But what I wanted to focus on was this. When you think about people analytics, you can do so much. You can figure out what the organization really needs. Who's going to stay? We talked about that. How do you develop them? How do you make sure that you develop the most talented leaders? Then there's another journey you think about. How do you improve the way that you work? How do you foster engagement? How do you increase diversity? Is someone looking at it? Is someone looking at making diversity specifically better? What are the levers they have? Do they have access to the people who hold the keys to those levers? Can you bring them together? How do you drive business value through HR? How do you improve customer satisfaction, decrease costs? Now, when you think about what analytics can do, all of these questions you can have an answer to, and you can have a data-driven response. Now, you could argue that if you put the wrong data in, or you have a wrong algorithm, you'll get the wrong results. Absolutely true. But the fact of the matter is, you can refine this over time. The fact of the matter also is, you might have 5% or 10% of the time where it's going to give you a predictive response that's wrong, but the other 90%, your time is freed up to do things that really matter. So at BCG, for example, I used to be the recruiting director in Malaysia, and we had to go through every CV that gets submitted. And it's a lot of time because ultimately you need to make sure that anyone who applies gets the due diligence and care that they need to be considered as a candidate. But over time we realized that ultimately we're looking for a few things only. To make it past that CV round and invite someone into an interview, there's really like 12, 15 things we're looking at most. And you can almost automate that. So we've started this process of having that first round done relatively quickly. Now, you still have someone who's looking over a few of them to ensure that you're not wrongly excluding people, you're not wrongly including people, you make that algorithm better. But you've freed up so much time from people who have to look through every single CV because that's not the best value. You focus them on interviews where really you need an individual to do that. And again, do you need to get people to interview in a specific room? No. You can do that virtually. You can do that in so many different ways. So the question becomes, how do you use data and analytics in your favor? How do you use that to free up your time so that your time is focused on delivering delight to your customers, which are your employees and the people in the organization? And how can you think about making step changes across them to stay ahead of disruption? That's the real crux of transformation. That's what you want to do. It's not about, let me make this specific aspect better. It's about, how do I have this specific goal that orients me and all the different pieces that need to fall in place to be able to deliver that. Great. So just as a matter of recap, we looked at why transformation is so important. And then in the second chapter, we talked about what are the aspects of transformation that we consider as priorities in 2022 going into 2023. And we said, you can't really look at everything. 3 aspects: operating model, employee journeys, think about that mindset shift, and the third thing was people analytics. How can you use analytics in your favor to be able to solve very specific problems that allows you to spend your time on what really matters? And now we move to the third part of it, which is, how do you make HR transformation stick? I asked you in the beginning how many people have been through transformation, and most of you raise your hands, because this is not new. Everyone's been through them. Many of you have been through 2 or 3. By the time you get through your 4th, you're like, oh my God, it's another transformation. There's this horrible people who are just going to be telling me to do these 5 things, and they're going to be at my back continuously until I deliver them. And if I don't, then I get punished for it. But ultimately, nothing changes in the organization. People know it's just another transformation. There's this new guy who's in town. This new guy's going to be driving this, he's happy for a few months, and then it's going to be all gone. Nothing's really going to change. But given that we have bought into this idea of there is a need to disrupt, there is a need to transform, we know what it takes, what's available out there, how do we make this transformation stick? How do we bring people along in that journey and ensure that it's not just another paper exercise, but in fact delivers results? Now, when you think about transformation, it's not really limited to HR transformations. This is data that BCG has from all the clients we work across the world, across industries, because transformation happens everywhere. You can transform any industry, any function. Sad reality is 4 in 5 transformations fail. And that's why I saw a lot of recognition when we talked about, another transformation. Yes, it's difficult. 4 of 5 of them don't deliver results. So how can we flip the odds? How do we become that 20% that is in fact gonna be working? And we unpack this in many different ways, but before we look into what are the specific aspects we need to look out for, let's take a step back and reflect on why HR transformation specifically might not work. You might focus only on leaders. Those are the people who need to change. You get different aspects of processes and technology that needs to change, and that's all you kind of do. You figure very much on a diffused effort, or you focus on everyone and you sort of give up. Maybe there's aspects of looking at the past, not so much focusing on what you're really going to be looking towards. So you figure out the faults that you've made, where you can make changes in the past, but you haven't really anticipated that the whole world is changing, and maybe making those small changes is not really going to be delivering results. There's so many different aspects where it doesn't really work together. And what we've discovered as BCG, typically, is when it comes to HR transformations, the way to flip the odds is to move towards a human-centric transformation. This is moving away from this idea of transformation is this big, hairy, ugly thing that needs to be done, to making it really human-centric. I mean, after all, it's human resources. So how do you make it really human-centric? Because that delivers results. This is data. This is not something we're just saying. It, in fact, delivers results. You need to bring together 3 things. There's the head. That's how you think. You figure out what's priority, what's important, what needs to change. You get the heart of it. It's only the heart that allows you to change. If you're not bought into it, if you don't have the motivation to be able to change, you don't bring the organization along in the heart, it's not going to work. You can think it's the right thing to do, but it just doesn't work. So you need the head, you need the heart, but you also need the hands. If you don't have the right people in the organization who can drive this forward, if you don't have the right skills, the right capabilities, even if your intentions are in the right place and people are motivated, it's not going to work because you're just not resourced to be able to do it. So what we've discovered is human-centered transformations that work need all three of these aspects working very, very closely together. You need the head, you need the heart, you need the hands. Now specifically, we spent the last part of it talking about what needs to be transformed. And that's important because in a way, that's the part of the head that's working. So you sort of have decided, these are the areas where we need to transform. The next part of it is, how do we get the heart? Because even if you get the hands working, you have the right people in the organization, let's say your talent strategy is great, you've been able to find the right people who can push this forward, and specifically for this transformation, you know who are the right individuals who can push it forward. You still need the heart. How do you get that heart to come along? And we typically think of this as 4 things which work in tandem. You've got your desired culture, you've got your leadership, you've got your people engagement, and you also have to have executional certainty. So let's unpack this a little bit. When we think about a desired culture, culture is a very big word. We throw it around all the time. This is the right culture for me, this is the wrong culture. The reason it didn't work is because the culture was off. What is culture? If you take a step back and think about what drives culture, it's about understanding where opportunities are, where are strengths in the organization, in the terms that the organization is hardwired. You could be an organization that's typically able to do anything that's very, very quick when it comes to spending money, let's say. Investments are not a problem. You have an investor, you have a team that's very agile with that. That's not the problem. Your culture is okay. But the culture is, I am never going to let employees go. And that can hold you back because if there's a certain aspect of a transformation that requires certain individuals who no longer have a role in that final end state that you've designed, and again, remember we talked about this strategic workforce planning, where you're looking ahead into the next few years and saying, this is exactly what I need. If that individual has no role, but that lever, that culture is taken away from you, that this individual cannot be used or cannot be let go, then that culture is not something that's letting you work towards. You need to figure out what are opportunities, what are strengths that you have that you can work on. And then it's about codifying that culture, being very, very specific. Let's actually move a slide ahead. Articulating that desired culture, desired behaviors. Figure out what are the behaviors you need. And I've moved away from saying these are the changes we need to the behaviors we need. What do you need to walk? What do you need to show? What do you need to demonstrate? This is not something that goes on a t-shirt you wear. It's not a mug that you carry and put on your table. This is not a purpose that's plastered on the wall. This is something that you really have to walk. You have to believe in. What are those behaviors? Have them codified. If people buy into those behaviors, excellent. If people don't buy into behaviors, have a way to ensure that they get imbibed into that behavior. If they don't, maybe it's an exit. But you need to figure out what those behaviors are. The third aspect is you need to activate the leaders. Ultimately, time, okay, yeah. So we'll finish up. You need to make sure that you're able to activate these leaders to show those behaviors, demonstrate them. The last part of it is embedding that desired culture in the organization. I'm very quickly going to talk about the last few things. Leadership. Leadership is super, super important for so many different reasons when it comes to transformation. First, you need to have them believe in that transformation. They need to understand the case for change, why they're doing it. They need to live those values, believe in it. They need to empower champions. They need to figure out people who are going to be able to drive this forward, and they're going to need to groom them and build them up. They need the skills they need, and you need to make it very, very actionable. So things like, what are the 3 to 4 actionable behaviors you need to change? And you make sure that that's very, very well known throughout the entire organization and is rewarded. Then you have this idea of people engagement. Just having leaders walk through and having HR change is not enough. You have to bring people along that journey, and it has to work in tandem with all the changes that you have in the what part that we talked about. So if you're going to have a change in your systems, if you're going to have a change in your processes, then the employees who are going to be beneficiaries of it, your business units that are going to be dealing with you, who are going to be looking at things differently, need to then be engaged and bought into this. This is for our own good. This is what's going to change. I'm going to be a person who's bought into this, and I'm going to bring it along. So very, very important not to focus this particular layer You have to understand the people, what they're looking for, how to bring them along. The last part of it is just ensuring that you have proper project management, you have a proper transformation team that's there, and you align them. One of the things I forgot to mention in the leaders part of it is, ultimately a lot of people are motivated just by incentives. So you need to make sure incentives are aligned. So if you need to reward people for showing the right behaviors, go ahead and do that. If you need to punish people for demonstrating the wrong behaviors, you do that as well. Same with this. Spend in the right places, but if it's not going far, stop it. Have the right stage gates, move them along. That's what drives the transformation. And ultimately, it delivers results, not just from the employee standpoint, because obviously that's very, very important, as we talked about, but it delivers business outcomes at the end of the day, which is what your company is working towards. So in summary, it's important to have the what. Make sure that's prioritized. You're looking at the right things. Make sure you're looking far enough into the horizon in advance, but very, very important to make sure you have the how part of it done right, which is how you bring the organization along so that people don't roll their eyes and say, it's another transformation. It's something that everyone buys into, they want to drive, and this is how we move it forward. Thank you very much. I'm going to be at the outside, so if you have any questions, happy to take some of them because we're out of time. Thanks very much.